very long on this energy district idea. What are we and what do we do? Efficiency first. We're digging into solar today, but efficiency first is a really important message and how you go about that. So then the solar, these third and fourth bullets, technical and financial aspects of solar. Who in here is familiar with soil and water conservation districts? Please raise your hand. Many of you, maybe half, more or less. So soil and water conservation districts came about in the 30s in response to the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl. Essentially a locally led, state authorized, but locally led process and approach to private lands conservation, to addressing the soil and water issues that were really plaguing rural America at that time. And they were key local partners for all the state and federal programs, USDA and everybody else, implementing those programs, worked through and with the local soil and water conservation districts, local leadership. In the energy world, starting 6-7 years ago, over in Winneshiek County, we're having these discussions. How do we move the whole community, county, rural areas forward on the energy transition? Efficiency, renewables, awareness, investment. How do we really do that beyond just a city government or a bank or a Luther College? How do we get everyone involved? So this was our answer. We said, look, soil and water districts did that. Local organization everywhere really moved everybody forward. So we started Winneshiek Energy District. It's a nonprofit. It's not a state-authorized subunit of state government like the soil and water districts are. But we're hoping it may move in that direction. And they're starting to replicate. Clayton County now has an energy district. Howard County is moving in that direction, hopefully, about to get an energy district. We've been talking for a year now with state legislators in Iowa, and they're studying pretty hard the idea of promoting energy districts around Iowa. Is that local leadership complement? So what do? We don't just talk. I'll ramble for a long time sometimes, but boots on the ground is the single most important part of what we try to do, and that's the technical analysis. Some of you may have had a free energy audit over the last few years, and some free energy audits are useful, but by and large, most technical analyses that a home, business, or farm have had aren't always especially useful. And what we're trying to do is up the quality of that and increase the universality, help everyone get a good energy analysis so you know where your efficiency opportunities are, where your renewable opportunities are, where the financial incentives are, and start that process to get the work done. And it's not always just one project. Oftentimes there's a stepwise, you can do this, you can do that. But those are the boots on the ground, and we're trying to make that progress. We've been working in that arena for 5 years in Winneshiek County. Another big aspect of it here, energy districts, is that local wealth creation and retention. Because the more we invest, the more energy dollars we keep local, and the more we invest in the infrastructure, in the efficiency work, in the renewables. I'm going to touch on that a little bit towards the end. The amount of money we think that's been invested in Winneshiek County, just in solar, is huge, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. So the local economic development, and over that way, is really bringing every player to the table here. Community identity, that's more in the education awareness. The network building, I've touched on. So again, this is just an intro to energy districts. Hopefully, as that sheet goes around, you can sign up and keep in touch with Amy for the conversations on the Howard Energy District. So efficiency first. Next slide starts solar. I promise we'll get to solar. Efficiency first, though. If you're really seriously thinking about solar, you really want to seriously think about getting an energy efficiency analysis before you invest in a solar system. That doesn't mean don't talk to contractors, schedule site visits, start that planning process. It's a good time. But at the same time, you better be doing some efficiency analysis, whether it's a home, a farm, a business, an institution, because quite often you've got potential to, with relatively cost-effective investments, reduce your energy use 10, 20, 30%. And what that means is for many folks that go the solar route and they try and build a solar system to cover most of their annual solar needs, of their annual electrical needs. If you do solar first and you build to cover most of your annual electrical needs, and then you find some really tremendous efficiency opportunities, you've overbuilt your solar. And that was a really big investment, and you actually may lose quite a bit of money over time on that investment. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit more. A couple specific opportunities here. We at the Energy District are running a Northeast Iowa-wide, 6 counties farm energy planning program. These printed out really lightly so they don't look like much, but please, if you're a farmer and you're interested in any aspect of energy efficiency or renewables, talk to me right after the workshop. Grab one of these and sign up, because what this is almost free, it's $100, but it's a really comprehensive energy analysis of your farm, of your operations, your facilities mostly. And we'll go right down the line and look at all the efficiency opportunities, all the USDA programs you're eligible for. There's some really good cost share available right now. We might even be able to get you to this March round, but if not, there will always be another round. And then look at how that also compares to your renewable energy opportunities and solar, if you're interested in it. You may end up just being interested in efficiency for a while and say, I'll revisit solar, after we get that done. So for farms, this is one of our major boots on the ground programs right now. We're doing it in 6 counties throughout Northeast Iowa. For homes and businesses, Green Iowa AmeriCorps for homeowners is one of our best options right now. Most of their work in the past has been in Winneshiek County, but they're increasingly going outside of Winneshiek County in partnership with local leadership in other counties. So if we have some significant signups and interest in their program in Howard County, we'll be working with local partners here to try and cover a few of the minimal costs, and we'll send that team over. You're probably all coming at this at different stages of awareness and analysis, and I'm not an electrician, nor am I an engineer. So hopefully that helps. My knowledge is not what some of the contractors in the room is. I'll try and speak at a pretty basic level, and if you have questions, jump in, and contractors can jump in as well. But essentially, efficiency first, I already covered. Grid connected, almost all solar arrays that are being built these days, customer owned, home, business, farm, institution, are connecting to the grid. You all have electric accounts, you all have meters. That's all coming from the grid. Historically, the grid has been a one-way street, largely. Central power plants, transmission lines, distribution lines, your house, your farm. So all the electrons are just coming the one way. What's happening now increasingly is the grid is becoming a two-way street. And so those that want to build, and this isn't just home farm business, this can be a college, it can be a government, it can be a municipal utility even, increasingly building local generation, most of it renewables, but not all. And then when there's surplus, it's going both ways. And so what happens when you build your solar array on your roof or on your farm, you connect it through on your side of your meter. So essentially all those electrons are serving your own load first. But on those warm, sunny afternoons, you're almost always producing more than you're using on site in that minute or hour of the day. And the excess goes into the grid. So you say, well, I don't want to give away all my power. That's what net metering is for. Net metering is a way that we're going to talk a lot more about here that essentially tracks what you feed the grid, and you get to use the same amount back, 1-to-1. It's a really key policy, technical and financial approach to solar. It's a really key policy for that, developing that two-way grid, that two-way street. There are a lot of issues surrounding net metering, and we'll touch on those a little bit, but basically, again, technically, you're connecting on your side of your meter, you're using your load, you're feeding the grid. The grid is essentially your storage, and then you're using from the grid again. It's not the same electron you put in, it's just, that's how it works. So you're producing DC, you need an inverter. The key part of that to know is, increasingly panels have the inverters built into each panel. And so you'll hear this as you talk to the contractors. Most contractors, most systems getting installed are microinverters these days. So the inverters are right in the panels, okay? So you don't have this standalone. 3 years ago, this was just about all there, 4 years ago, most systems came with these standalone inverters, string inverters. Now most of them are built into the panels, but you can still do it this way, and there are good reasons to do it this way. It's not an obsolete technology, but that's just one more piece of the technical puzzle to keep in mind. Mounting location and inverter options. I just mentioned the inverter options, but mounting location, you often hear rooftop solar. Rooftop solar is not the only way to do customer-owned solar. There's a lot of pole mounts going in, a lot of ground mounting as well. And even with rooftops, if you think you have a great south-facing rooftop, and a contractor would make them out and say, yeah, it's not a great rooftop for solar. There are just various reasons there. Ground mounting works just fine. It oftentimes may add a little bit of cost just for that infrastructure in the installation, not normally a whole lot more. all large solar arrays are all ground mounted. You can't install a megawatt of solar on a roof. You can on 100 roofs or 1,000 roofs, but utility-owned solar is all racking ground mounted solar. If you have a rooftop, great. If you don't, that's not a limiting factor, as long as you still have a site with good sunshine, right, to put it. And sometimes in town, that is a limiting factor. And so, on average, nationwide, these studies are about half of homeowners in the U.S. cannot do solar, custom-owned solar, rooftop solar, because they don't have an adequate rooftop or space in their mostly city lots to install solar.
What percentage of AU qualify for good solar? How much sun you got?
Well, you want to have pretty direct sun exposure most of the day, at least 9 to 3, 9 to 4. Yeah, and that is one of the things. Again, if you have contractors come look at your place to do a site assessment, you can do some pretty easy analysis of where and how much. It's not that you can't have any shading, for example. You can, and the microinverter panels, again, built into each panel, work better that way, because that way each panel is producing independently. If you're using a string inverter, generally, if shade is on part of it, the whole array is not producing, or is producing at that lower level. But the microinverters built into the panels, that's partly why they're a better system. It's more adaptable for small sites where there may be some shading issues. But generally, you want to have mostly full sun exposure most of the day. You'd be surprised sometimes, though, at how much, you may think there's a whole bunch of trees over there, but even when the sun gets low in the wintertime, it's still maybe skirting above some of that. So you can squeeze systems in without just a whole wide sky looking like Montana, but you still do need that sunshine. How much do they produce? This is a key question mark, again, that relates to the connection and the net metering and the grid being a two-way street. When you install solar, again, you're looking at something that's going to overproduce most of the time the sun is shining on those sunny afternoons, because it's banking. You're banking. You're building up some credits that you can use at night. Even if every single day were sunny, you still have power usage at night. And if you want to design a system for most of your annual usage, say in a house or on a farm or business, you've got to overproduce for when it's maximally producing, and then you've got to be using at night and when it's cloudy the rest of the time. And so how do you figure that out? You go to pvwatts.nrel.gov, that website right there. And these resources are on our website too, but there are other calculators. That's the one that most folks use, many folks use. Essentially what they've done is they've built a database of where the sun is in the sky and how many watts hit every square meter of the country on average every day of the year, every hour of the year. And so then you can plug in your data on your system. What slope is your roof? Is it facing straight south or southeast or southwest, right? If you're not going to put it on a roof and you're going to ground mount, you actually have more flexibility to set it up exactly at the right angle and orientation to maximize the annual production. You can, if you're doing a ground mount and you want to maximize your afternoon production, you can turn it a little to the southwest, for example. This is just all, sort of set up. All those details are in PV Watts. It's relatively simple to use. And you can say, okay, here's my parameters, here's my orientation, here's my tilt, here's my zip code, so that tells the system where you live, and it'll give you this number eventually. If you plug in a system size of 1 kW, 1 kilowatt, it'll give you a number something like this, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,450 kilowatt hours per year. A kilowatt of solar is 3 to 4 panels. So all the panels you see out and around, 4 of them often is about a kilowatt. Contractors, again, will help you figure all that out. But for every 3 or 4 panels, for every kilowatt of panels, you're going to produce whatever PV Watts tells you in kilowatt hours per year. Go back to your bills, figure out how many kilowatt hours you used in a year, how many kilowatt hours you bought from the utility in 12 months. Ideally, do that for 2 years, 2 12-month periods, so you get a little bit better average. You take that total kilowatt hours that you use for 12 months and divide it by this number, about 1,300 or whatever PV watt says for what your system will be producing, usually 1,300 to 1,400. And that tells you how many kW, how many panels you're going to need. Again, the contractor will help figure all this out, but what you want to do then is, all right, here's my total 12-month usage. You got to think again. Am I going to do efficiency first? Do I want to build to that 100%, or do I want to build to 90 or 95%? You don't want to overproduce. We'll talk more about that. You don't want to produce more than you use in 12 months. The utility don't want you to, and you really don't want to, because financially it won't work very well. So you want to install something close, maybe, to your total production, if you have the capacity to do that, but not over. And that's, again, why you need to be thinking about efficiency first. If you're going to say you've got a livestock facility and you're going to change out all your lighting LEDs and you're going to drop your power usage 5% or more, you want to know that before you size your PV array. Dairy barn, oftentimes power usage with efficiency practices, we might drop to 20%. That's a pretty significant figure. So you're going to run through the calculations on system size, and then your contractor is going to help you, hopefully, mostly with this piece too, interconnection process, cost, timeline. Every utility essentially is required to allow you to interconnect your solar system. Okay, that's essentially federal regulation. They're not all required to pay you the same value. That gets back to the net metering. But they're required to interconnect you, and usually the costs aren't real huge. But there's a process, you need to apply for it, and again, the contractor can help with all that. You just need to know it's not going to happen overnight. You do a little bit of planning. And so here in Howard County, you're in a pretty decent situation with Reliant in town and Hawkeye RAC in the country. Basically, two utilities, pretty similar policies, and they both do net metering, which is something you really need. Again, when you get quotes from your contractors, equipment, warranties, you'll want to ask about all that. Most of these solar systems carry 25-year warranties. That's pretty good. There are plenty of farmers around the Midwest wishing that the wind that they might have invested in a while back carried a 25-year warranty and actually worked. Unfortunately, mid-scale, farmer-owned wind, there have been some real problems. Some of it was working great, but there have been some really significant investments made and left some farmers out in the cold. And that's why I put this here, solar versus wind, because we get that question a fair amount from customers, home farm business, looking and saying, should I build solar, should I build wind? You know, for the farmers in the audience, wind has a lot of moving parts, and you know what that means. And solar essentially has no moving parts. That's really the trade-off right there. Wind is a great energy source, and utility scale wind is economical. In fact, it's the cheapest wind in the country right now, on average nationwide. But the energy in the wind, first of all, just goes up exponentially as you go up in the air. And the turbine that you might install or I might install for a home or farm, and our neighbors have one, is only going to be 100 feet up in the air, and the turbine the utility is going to install is 400 feet up in the air. They've got 3 times as much energy up there. So just those figures alone, let alone the fact that any wind turbine you install, you're going to have maintenance on quite a bit. And any solar panel you install, hopefully, you're not. You shouldn't, really. You should be able to set it and forget it, unless you have to take it off to replace your shingles or something like that. So, again, we can't promise that all solar is going to be totally maintenance-free or trouble-free. But there are panels in Winneshiek County that have been around over 30 years now. The same fundamental technology, silicon-based, PV, electric production, no maintenance for 30 years. One inverter change out, because those old string inverters are typically 10 to 15-year lifespans. And those things are producing power just chugging along the same way they always have. And that's what we certainly hope that we're going to see with all the current generation of solar. IOUs and COUs and net metering, you've heard me mention net metering a number of times. These are investor-owned utilities and consumer-owned utilities. Investor-owned utilities, Alliant, consumer-owned utilities, the co-ops, and the munis. And I just mentioned that because their business models are diverging a little bit. Consumer-owned utilities, co-ops, and munis, we own them. We, the citizenry of whatever that co-op or muni may be. And though they're part of the utility world, they're still actually responsive somewhat to their membership, and potentially over time more able to adapt to the changing energy culture. Investor-owned utilities just have different challenges. We've been trying to do a collaborative community solar project for a year now in Decorah with Reliant, and we just haven't gotten anywhere. I don't blame Reliant for that. It's not in their interest, but it's in our interest. And so how to figure those differences out. If you've got a consumer-owned utility like a muni, essentially you're in control at the local level. That everyone may not agree on where you should be headed, but you do have a lot more control of your future power generation. When you establish your solar system, you're going to feed the grid. Same with wind, if you did wind. You're going to feed the grid, and you want to be able to get that power back, or get the value of that power back when you need it. 1-to-1. Net metering, retail rate net metering is 1-to-1. Not all utilities offer net metering. In Iowa, the investor owns Alliant Mid-American are required to, but they're in the process right now of asking the utilities board to move away from net metering. So in the future, you might not be able to do that as an Alliant customer. Hawkeye, REC, and L&T Clayton, who we work with, both of them a great deal, do offer net metering, but not all co-ops and munis in Iowa do. And that's why I'm saying you're fortunate here, because these two co-ops do offer net metering. They have. There's some slight variations in policies between co-ops and munis on what the net metering, how it works, how much you can build up, what happens at the end of the year, all that kind of stuff. But by and large, they offer retail net metering, and that's pretty important. And we should thank them for that and continue to talk to them and make sure that that sticks around, that those policies stay around. Because there's no guarantee that they will. And this is actually happening state by state by state across the country now, where net metering has been the law of the land, essentially. Utilities oftentimes are asking the regulators to change it and to move away from net metering because they feel it's an unfair relationship. And we aren't going to get into all the policy on that now. We can during the panel if people really have questions about it, but we'll kind of save that for the time being. So PV technical, those are some of the basics. Now I'm going to hit a few of the financial figures because that's always someone's next question. Well, what's my payback? How quickly does it pay? Does it make sense? But really quickly, does anyone have any really pressing questions on some of these technical issues I've just touched on? Not tried to go into super depth on. If so, you can ask me now, or you can ask the panelists as well.
I got a question.
Yeah.
What about, if you have some bad weather, some lines went down, is there a disconnect, and whose responsibility is that?
There is a disconnect. First of all, the inverters are all built to shut off if the grid power shuts off. So the inverters will prevent, that's the first line of defense, will prevent power from going back onto the grid if there's a power outage on the grid, so the grid line workers won't get that. There's redundancy built in, and there is also now a disconnect required to be installed at the meter. And then the utilities all have maps of that, and local public safety personnel should have maps of that too. I think the state of Iowa is building that mapping network right now. So there are multiple, essentially, layers of disconnect.
I mean, as the cost of solar, has it gone down, or?
Yep. It has. I'll jump into this unless anyone has anything else really pressing. When we started the Energy District in 2010, essentially, we weren't working on solar much. Almost all our work was energy efficiency. We were doing a lot of those energy audits, boots on the ground work, worked with 100 businesses in Decorah, 80% of them implemented major projects. Between our standalone home energy auditing and the AmeriCorps team, we've been in probably 700 homes in Winneshiek County, dozens of farms. Efficiency was where it was at, and just in that time period, 5 years, the cost drops of solar have been so dramatic that now for many people, the solar payback is quicker than some of the efficiency work. I mean, just about anything, for example, lighting-wise, if you're an incandescent in your house and you go to new LEDs, I mean, that's such a quick payback, it's not even a question mark. But solar has a quick payback now, thanks in large part to the price drops. Those price drops are both in the panels themselves. The global, essentially, price of silicon, the super refined silicon needed to go into these panels has plummeted, starting about 4 years ago. But also the buildup of the market transformation, the buildup of a network of contractors, the markets of competition, right? Create some of these price drops. So we're looking at this $9 per watt down to $2.50 per watt, more or less. That depends on the system size, of course. Over this time period is very, very dramatic. And what does that mean? It means at this level, the payback times are good enough for most homes, farms, and businesses to take that jump when you have net metering. Again, if you don't have net metering, and the utility says, okay, whatever you feed the grid that you're not using your side of the meter, you get what's called avoided cost, say 3 cents, and you get 3 cents credited to your bill, but yet then every kilowatt hour you're using, you're paying 12, 8, 12, 15, whatever it may be, then the value of the electricity on an annual basis that you produce was just chopped in half or more, and your payback time was just spread way out by 3 times as many years. So again, net metering is so important, but beyond that, financially, the tax incentives here are really important. And the good news is that we can say running around here now that was wide open and unknown the end of last year, the federal solar tax credits were set to expire. They were going to expire this year, but Congress was analyzing them the end of last year, and amazingly, extended them. Something actually happened before it had to happen. I mean, they could have waited till the end of this year that we're in to make that decision, and of course the markets wouldn't have known, and it would have been a mad rush, literally a mad rush this year for a lot of folks to build solar, and the supply chains would have broken down and the prices would have started to go back up because there would have been so much demand probably to put in solar this year. Contractors might have liked that temporarily, but maybe not. We're actually in a much better spot now because federally, the investment tax credit was extended another 5 years. And that's starting from January 2017. So we've got 2017, 18, and 19 at 30% tax credit. That's on the total installed cost of a solar system. And I said they extended for 5 years. The 4th and 5th year, it drops down to something less than that. I don't even remember what it was. Does anybody know? From 30% down to 20 and then 15 or something like that. So it phases out a little bit. But basically, you've got 2016 plus 3 more years of the full value of the federal tax credit. Iowa, thankfully, has a piggyback tax credit that essentially mirrors the federal at half value. So they say whatever the federal credit is, we give you half that. So basically it's 15% of your total installed cost. So they do have caps, 5,000 and 20,000 for a residential or commercial system. That's the max you can get out of the Iowa. That works for most systems except actually for the larger ones. For the larger commercial systems, they can start going over what that would be, 15%. But the bigger question actually for the Iowa tax credit is they also have system-wide caps. At the federal level, you can have 1 million people build solar and they all get that 30% this year. But you have to have the tax equity, right? You have to have the tax liability to use those credits. If you don't pay any taxes, you don't use the credits. That incentive isn't worth very much to you. That's one big kicker. Nonprofits, local governments, Luther College, can take the tax credit, not directly. You can take it indirectly, and that's a whole workshop. We have held entire workshops on taking the tax credits for non-taxable entities over in the Cora. I'll touch on it really briefly here in a couple minutes, but for those that can take the tax credit, 30% federal is great. Iowa's 15% essentially, half of the federal, is great, and will probably continue on out with the federal. But with that total annual cap of $5 million in the program, what's been happening is folks that are signing up are installing solar, sending in their notice to the Department of Revenue saying, hi, I'm in line now for the Iowa tax credit. That annual cap is filling up by the middle of the year, give or take. And you still then get on the line on the waiting list for next year's tax credit. And next year, solar's every year, there's more and more, faster and faster. Next year, that cap is reached in March. Might be this year, right now. And then everyone else is on the waiting list for the next year, except there was already a waiting list from the past year, right? So the Iowa cap on the entire value of the Iowa tax credit is important, and there is a bill right now in the legislature to up that cap. Not up the individual value, the 15% that you would get, but up the overall total cap, so you don't have to be on a waiting list for 2 or 3 years before you get to use a credit. That bill is in the legislature right now. It would behoove you to go ahead and talk to your legislators. We put that out on our electronic newsletter every year this time of year. That cap has been raised twice in the history of Iowa's tax credit, which has only been around, I don't know, 6 years or so, 6 or 7 years. So they've been responsive to that, but whether it gets raised this year, it's a really tight budget situation, and they're not talking a whole lot down there right now. So the third bullet, very important, and this is the key kicker on why farms and businesses have a better payback than homes. Home farm business, mostly taxable entities, right? Not everyone, but if you've got tax liability, you can use the tax credits. A homeowner can't take depreciation on the car they buy. A farm can take depreciation on the truck they buy, right? Or any of a wide array of other capital investments that a business makes. A farm, of course, is just a business in the tax code, in the federal tax code. So when you can take depreciation at whatever your marginal tax rate is, you get your maker's 5-year accelerated depreciation on solar systems. You stack that value on top of your tax credits, and that chops down even more the total amount that you're going to pay in the end. So my next slide is going to go over this a little bit more. And these lower bullets are an example, but the first couple things I want to say, because Bill's going to come up here pretty soon. The tax credits, tax benefits, tax credits and depreciation are really the principal financial incentives for you to go solar. They're the main ones that you apply to almost everybody. You might remember Alliant had a rebate that ended back in 2014, I believe. That was a really good amount of money, except that it was around back when solar was still pretty expensive and there wasn't a whole lot of adoption. And they saw the adoption rates picking up, and the program expired, and right when, when everybody might want to go ahead and build solar, Alliance rebate's not around anymore. So it's really mainly the tax credits. But I want to mention a couple of these things here. They're not universally applicable, really. REAP, Rural Energy, what are they?
For America.
Rural Energy for
For
America
America.
program. Thanks. Been around for a long time, so everyone just calls it REAP. It's mostly been used by farmers for doing energy projects, and some of those early generation farm wind turbines, for example, 15 years ago, were installed with REAP grants. Can do energy efficiency and renewable energy, but it's not limited to farmers. That's a grant program open to all rural businesses, including farms, but also mom and pop businesses in rural areas. All of our counties essentially qualify as rural areas. We're so rural. But it's a competitive grant program. That's why I say it's not universally applicable to everybody. It's not something you can just count on like the tax credit. If you have tax liability, you can figure into your economics of the solar system the tax credit. You can figure in this if or if not. And that's what we've done with some larger systems that we work with folks on planning. If you get the REAP grant, it's 25%. Takes it down, makes it even that much more affordable. If you don't get the REAP grant, you don't get those funding. It's a competitive grant program, and your chances of getting in increasingly maybe, because the program is growing in applicants, maybe only 1 in 5, 1 in 6, 1 in 7 folks get one of those grants. Maybe less. So it is out there, and you can think about it. The ANRLP, this is Alternative Energy Revolving Loan Program, and Bill will mention more about this. It's not a grant, it's not a tax credit, it's a financing program, 0% interest on half of your system cost if you're financing all of it. And that is also a competitive program, and he can tell you more about how you can or how you might want to apply for that. It's open to everybody. But it's also competitive, and oftentimes the most competitive projects are the larger projects because they have the lowest installation costs and the quickest turnaround. And this is ranked, as Bill will explain more on, essentially the term of the loan. Okay, so I'm going to go in just to go through one example here. And then probably pretty quickly we'll get into our panel. As we get our panelists up here, though, Bill's going to do a 10-minute summary of his guide that's coming out. Let's say you install a 40 kW system. Again, 40 times 4, 160 panels, right? That's a pretty big system. But I put 40 because that's the max that you can interconnect and net meter with the co-ops. Alliance max is 500 kW. But most of the co-ops in Iowa, in fact, certainly Allen Key Clayton as well, have this 40 kW max. That's still a pretty good sized solar system. And let's say if it were $2.50 a watt, 2,500 per kW, you'd have a $100,000 investment. We've seen this on quite a number of farms around Northeast Iowa, 25 to 40 kW going in. A residential system is only going to be 5 kW, maybe 10 if you've got a geothermal system that uses a lot of power. But say you're on a farm or a business and you want to install that 40 kW. 100 grand investment, okay, figure based on how it's installed, the angle, the tilt, all that kind of stuff, what the actual production is most likely to be using that PV watts calculator. And let's say it's about 1,350 kilowatt hours per kW installed per year. Okay, if it's 40 kW system times 1,350 kilowatt hours per year, times whatever you're paying for your power, could be 12 cents, it could be less, it could be more. You get essentially a dollar value of the power that you just generated first year and every single year thereafter. Okay, so now you've got the dollar value of your energy, and that's theoretically what you're getting credit for, what you're lowering your bill by, about that amount per year. Okay, but your install cost was $100,000, $6,400 per year. That sounds like it's going to take 15 years or more, or way more even to pay off. Except we've got these incentives. So 45% ITC, 45% tax credit. That's the combination of federal and state as an island. Neighboring states don't have that same benefit. 45% tax credit plus depreciation, which obviously is going to depend on your bracket, right? It could be 15%, it could be 30%, whatever it may be. The higher bracket you're in, the more the depreciation is worth to you. The 45K is the 45% tax credit off of 100,000. The 21K is, I believe I used in this example, a 25% tax credit. So why isn't it worth 25K? Because the basis for your depreciation is reduced by half the value of your federal tax credit. This is just a general understanding. Your accountants will know all this, hopefully. But if your total install cost is $100,000, and if your federal tax credit was 30%, that's $30,000. Half of that is $15,000. Reduce $100,000 by 15, you get $85,000. Take 25% of $85,000, you get $21,000, probably 200 and something. So that's essentially the depreciation. And so then you end up with, oh, well, so really I'm only paying out of pocket $34,000. Again, that's a really generalization. You got to take the tax credits. This takes time. There's time value in money. We get that, but this is a very simple overview. So your simple payback, if you produce $6,400 a year in power, and you invested $34,000, 5.25 years simple payback. Just an example. Again, this is how we get to these 5-year simple paybacks that you might be hearing about. Not too long ago, it was 8 years. For residences right now, no depreciation in there. For homeowners, we're more out in that 7 or 8 years. More, 10, less, depending on the site, the simplicity of install, the cost that they're quoted, right? For farms and businesses with depreciation, and again, depending on all these site variables, we're at 5, 6, right on down to 4 and under. See 3.5-year simple paybacks. But again, now remember, this is simple paybacks. There's lots of other things involved here, and they're big investments. So there's something you need to work with your accountant on. The last bullet here, okay, interest. You're taking out loans for this. What's the cost of your capital? That has to be worked in here. Insurance, yes, normally we want to insure something of value. They are warranted, obviously, but property tax doesn't apply immediately, but after 5 years is likely to. Department of Revenue still seems to be waffling on some of this. Operation and maintenance, hopefully essentially nothing, but anything you own could have operation and maintenance. On the other hand, and I just started a couple items here, there could be more value than what you're counting. The first one is a hedge on power costs. So your power bill has never, I would bet, correct me if I'm wrong, gone down on a per kilowatt hour basis. Maybe unless you switched account types, or if you went from a general service to a demand meter, the energy component might get cheaper, but overall, electricity costs don't get cheaper. They get a little more expensive. This is using one number. This system will produce for 25 years, figure, could produce for 35, right? But so in 10 years from now, what's the power gonna cost you? If it costs more than this payback is faster. You know, it would already be paid back in 10 years, right? But so the payback goes down as your power costs go up. Is net metering a good approximation or an unfair trade? These are policy arguments that are being had in every single state around the country. In 40 states right now, it's a regulatory action. Utility boards have open dockets. Iowa is one of those. It's been going on for 2 years, and it's starting to come to a head right now. So we will see over the next few months, probably a few months to a year, whether the Iowa Utilities Board decides to allow the utilities to move away from net metering or not.
When they talk about moving away from it, do they grandfather in people who are already net metering, or are they talking about taking it all away?
What do you think they should do? That's an open question. So Nevada, Miles referred to, most states that have looked at this have said for now, net metering is maybe imperfect, but it's a pretty good approximation of that trade. Making the grid a two-way street, getting fed valuable solar, using the grid as a battery, all these bits of trade. Most states have said so far, we're just going to keep going with that.
So, in light of the possible changes with net metering and the attempt to make solar more cost effective, do you think that the battery options are practical? Particularly, I'm thinking of the Tesla Powerwall, which is a 6.4 kilowatt battery for $3,000.
Yeah, good question. I'll finish that because I didn't know if you had something on. So, for the net metering, however, California, for example, just most recently, the biggest case in the country, easily for the last year that's been looking at this, said, yes, net metering is still a decent trade, we're going to go with it. Nevada, at almost the same time, Nevada's regulators said, no, we'll accept the utilities arguments. There will be no more net metering. The utilities will slap a monthly fixed charge on all new solar customers. So not only do you not get to use the grid, you don't get equal value for what you pay. What you feed in electrons, then you also pay an extra, maybe $50 a month or whatever it may be, just to be connected with your solar system. Nobody's going to install solar, just totally kills the economics of it, right? They made it retroactive. Normally, and there are a few other states that have started to move away from that metering, it essentially moves from that point forward, and I actually expect in Iowa, if we went that route, which I'm not convinced we will, I'm still pretty hopeful we won't. If we do, I do not believe the utility board would be making it retroactive. But in Nevada, it was made retroactive. Folks that installed solar systems with a 5 or 10 year payback period over the last 3 years now have 50 to 80 year payback periods. What are you going to do? You can't return it to the contractor, can you? So it's an unknown. I don't want to scare people because I really believe we're in a pretty good position now, and as long as we have net metering and as long as you build, you will see the payback and you will have a good system, but there are unknowns here. Now, storage is something I wish we could do a whole other workshop on storage, and it's true. Increasingly, people worried about how the utility might treat them or whether that grid value and net metering is going to stick around for them are starting to consider storage. The financial slide that I showed right here, this curve, okay, solar costs dropped off a cliff. Starting 5 years ago, 6 years ago, just plummeted down, and now they're starting to level out. They can't go to zero, can they? So they're somewhere down here. I think they will go to 1 here in the next few years. But storage is right here falling off that cliff, okay? The technologies are there. The production is being ramped up, extremely high levels already, in part thanks to the electric car markets, but also for the home storage and the utility storage markets. So the battery options are coming down here. Are they going to come down as fast as solar did? Are we 3 years away or 6 years away from being down here? At whatever point they drop, and they will, like solar did, it'll be economically viable for you and me, the farm and business and home, to buy your own solar and not worry about the grid. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Many folks think, hey, I want to flip the switch. I want to turn off the grid. I want to have my own perfectly viable system and not worry about all that policy stuff. Is that good for the grid? The grid is a pretty important societal benefit here, and these are the messages that we and others are trying to send to the utilities board right now. The decisions they make on what they allow and don't allow Iowa utilities to do regarding solar policy and the desires of so many people to be participants now in the grid, in that two-way street. The decisions the board allows the utilities to make will determine how we all react when storage is cheap. Are we gonna say hell with the grid and get off? And I'm not talking just a homeowner, I'm talking a community, Luther College. Luther College is undergoing a study right now with the Department of Energy on the future of their energy system. They have more solar than any other customer in Iowa. And they're undergoing a storage study right now to look at how they can essentially be 100% electrically independent. Whether they design a roadmap to go off-grid or to stay on-grid while they're building their renewable energy is going to be determined by what the utilities board decides in the next year, probably. So it's a really interesting time right now. Fast. I'm not going to spend much time on this. This is essentially about non-taxable entities. If you are interested in solar for a non-taxable entity, feel free to touch bases with me. We've got a lot of resources and customers at Luther College and others that have done this. The city is looking at a third-party approach. Essentially, there are ways to get the tax benefits passed through to non-taxable entities. Not 100% of them, because the third party involved is in it for profit, right? But you can get some of that passed through, and those enabling technologies and approaches are out there. PPA is called Power Purchase Agreement, and it can happen. So, local solar, my last couple slides here, I'm wrapping it up. Bill's gonna come up, talk for a few minutes, and we'll have a panel. This is just about dollars and cents value to a local economy. Renewables are now, this isn't a climate change question. In the energy world, it's inevitable. Everything is going to be renewables, essentially, almost everything at least. We're going really quickly just from economics towards an 60, 80, towards 100% renewable energy, mostly based on economics. The biggest question mark is who's gonna own it. That's what the debate is about with net metering. That's what the debate is about with all policy arguments right now. This is a study that was done in 2015 on solar penetration rates in the biggest metro areas in the country. So how much solar per capita? This is in DC watts per person in everywhere from Albuquerque up to Honolulu. In Hawaii, power is expensive, and so the payback is quick, and so a lot of folks have done solar. So in Hawaii, there's a lot of solar, and in Honolulu, they have 276 watts per person when they did this study a year plus ago. And then it drops down in the US to Indianapolis, interestingly, at 127 watts per person and right on down. Decorah, Winneshiek County, we're right about there. 264 watts per person is our best guess. It's actually higher than that because when I put those numbers together 3 or 4 months ago, Honolulu is probably higher too. So these numbers are going up all the time. All I'm saying is the more solar you build locally, there's a lot of dollars churning in that process. It's the churning in the installation, it's also then the energy dollars saved. Every kilowatt hour that you generate is energy dollars saved, and most of those energy dollars leave our counties and our communities. There's dollars in retail, but most of those energy dollars go out the power and gas lines, and they leave our communities. And when they're kept local, that's a huge opportunity.